says when we're recording. All right, there we go, and away we go. So thanks to everyone for joining today. As Ali mentioned, I'm Sherry Elson. I'm one of the certified elder law attorneys at Anderson Elder Law, and we're going to spend our time today talking about life care planning and how life care planning as an approach to growing older is something that we embrace here at our firm. And so we'll go through a little bit what that means today. And so hopefully you'll come away with a better understanding of the things that you should be thinking about as you're moving through your life to get, organized on your aging journey. So Allie, we'll go to the next slide. Excellent. So, for us, life care planning is what we call elder law done right. And so a lot of clients who call our office are usually in a pretty agitated state. And I say that without any judgment, but because people don't call a lawyer unless something has gone wrong. Very few people call us just to say hello. So the idea is when clients call, they're really looking for a quick solution or things that they might have heard a neighbor do or on the internet. And, things like, well, should I do a trust, right? That would be maybe the preliminary question that we would get. And when we do elder law the right way, we'll say, a trust might be part of the solution that we propose for you, but we're really looking at things more holistically. When we're designing a plan for you, we're going to look at the legal, we're going to look at the financial, and we're going to look at the medical, right? The plan of care. So we're looking at the disability of the person. We're also looking at obviously issues related to what happens when the person passes away. We know people are focused on the taxes related to that, and maybe their questions are really focused there. But our approach is really to understand where does the older adult in the caller's, description of things, and the older adult frequently isn't the caller to us. Where is the older adult on the continuum of care? Where do they want to age, right? That's really important, bringing them into the discussion. Where do they want to be? Do they want to be at home? Do they want to move to a more supportive environment? And if so, do they have any preferences about that, whether a specific facility or the geography? There's lots of things, that we need to talk about before we get to the solutions. And then it sort of marries the estate planning and the care planning with really the asset protection planning, this public benefits work. So our firm does a lot of Medicaid planning for folks because there is, as we'll see, there is a limited set of circumstances where you can get public funding to pay for your health care. So we need to figure out, is that a pathway we want to go down? Maybe, maybe not. My hope always is that when we talk to clients in this, or future clients in this case, or people who just want more information, if you come away with one sort of overarching thing, it would be that this stuff is more complicated than you think. It's more involved than you think. And it's not just something you can Google, there's a lot of information on the internet. But when we're thinking about care planning, estate planning, and asset planning, the planning has to be contextual for a person, for a family. And every family we work with is different. There's different family dynamics, there's different family structures. The assets are usually, different from case to case. And there might be different attachments to certain assets, like, I don't know, a shore house. So all of these things need to be viewed and analyzed holistically to come up with a plan. And if we do all of that, then we're doing elder law the right way because we're doing our asset and estate planning work in support of where that older adult wants to be on the continuum of care, right? If we just focus on the asset work, we're going to miss the mark on the most important piece. So that's why we transitioned, to be a life care planning firm, several years ago now. And we'll get into that a little bit more as we go along. Can we go to the next slide? Excellent. So As I mentioned, there's three core areas that we hit on whenever we meet with a new client: the estate planning, the care planning, and the asset planning. So when we look at that, we're going to ask you for things that we need to know to be able to advise you. So some people get a little annoyed that we need to look at, say, prior estate planning documents, right? Or current financial statements. Like because this isn't just something simple, that these decisions about care planning are so contextual, that's not something that somebody should tell you based on no information, right? There's no one size fits all for any of this stuff. But if we hit these core areas, then we're going to do hopefully a really good job for our families and make them feel like, yeah, you guys got it, and we're where we need to be with our care. So let's just talk about the first one. The next slide talks about why estate planning is important. So what makes up an estate plan? Some people hear the word estate plan and they think, well, I don't have millions of dollars. Do I have an estate that needs to be planned? Is that really true? Does it matter? Isn't this just paperwork that I can get off the internet? And the answer is everybody needs an estate plan, and the best estate plans are ones that are designed for you in particular. So a comprehensive estate plan. So what is that? So if everybody needs an estate plan, well, what does that mean? What do you get? Well, you're going to get a last will and testament, a durable power of attorney, a healthcare power of attorney with an advance directive, also called a living will, right? And that would be the foundational set of what you would need at a minimum. And these are important because we want to make sure well ahead of time, before there's a crisis situation, that you've figured out who you want to make your financial and healthcare decisions for you if you can't name them or make them yourself. So this really is so critical. In the over 20 years I've been doing this work, every now and then I'm called to the bedside of somebody who didn't get their sort of affairs in order, and we're trying to have the conversation with them about who do you want to have be your decision maker. And it's a really challenging time to have the conversation. And maybe the best decisions aren't, made at that time. Maybe they are, depends on the person. But getting these things done well ahead of time and picking the person that you would want to serve as your financial and healthcare decision makers is really critical. I think we tend not to think about it so much when we're healthy, right? It's like, oh, that's a down the road problem. But unfortunately, illness sort of strikes without a timetable, without a schedule. You're fine one day, the next day you've had a heart attack, right? And now the idea of having these documents in place with somebody you want to make your decisions for you becomes really critical. If you don't have the documents, there's a question I get a lot. Well, what if I don't do it? What if I don't feel like it? Lawyers are expensive and annoying, and I don't want to do it. What happens then? Well, you could end up in the orphans court with somebody petitioning to be your guardian. And guardianship is a really terrible place to be. This is somebody who doesn't have to be related to you. It could just be somebody in your life. Maybe not always a good actor. It could be a bad actor looking to get control over you. And they just have to convince the judge that you can't handle your financial affairs or make essential decisions for your health and safety. Now, that's kind of the dire situation. The legal standard is still what I laid out. But, even amongst families, there can be children that you have where one might be the one that you would pick, but because you didn't do your planning, another child who you, if you had made the decision, is the one that is the one petitioning for guardianship. The child that you wouldn't have selected could petition for guardianship. And that can get really messy when we have family squabbles playing out. in the orphans court. And when people hear about this, they say, oh, well, what do we do? Get your documents in order. And again, meeting with an attorney is really critical. So when I meet with clients, one of the first things I want to know about is the family dynamics, right? Who are your kids? Where do they live? How do you get along with them? How do they get along with each other? Are there any in-laws who are outlaws that nobody really likes that could be problematic? Now, it seems like, what does that have to do with anything? But when you look at the types of cases that end up in orphans court, right, and you look at some of the circumstances that lead to people delaying their planning, it's often the messy family dynamics, right? Oh, I don't want to make a decision. This one will be upset. That one will be upset, things like this. And if you're working with an attorney, we're going to guide you to making the choice, giving you some guidance on how do you talk to your family about that? How do you set up the documents? What are the options? Um, and hopefully that allows you to have a document that where your wishes are set forth, your decision makers are set forth. We keep you out of the courthouse, and when you become unable to make decisions for yourself, the right person is in the driver's seat. And then the sort of last point there is, again, everything that we do relates to care planning, right? Where do you want to be? What's your family situation like? Do you have a spouse that's probably should be in a nursing home or could be in a nursing home? So we need to restructure or structure if there isn't a plan in place already to have the estate plan support a spouse who's going to be remaining in the community while another one goes into the nursing home. So all of it is really, sort of interrelated. The care planning, the asset planning, um, and the estate planning. But if you don't meet with somebody who can help you knit all this together, you're going to miss the mark by just sort of getting documents from the internet. And then we go to the next slide. So I think I covered some of all of this. Again, estate planning is just the process of arranging and managing your financial affairs so your wishes are respected in the event of incapacity or death. Um, Again, we want to avoid disputes. Unnecessary taxes is a big one that people don't always think about, when they're, just trying to do plans on their own. So we really want to make sure that whoever you work with, and again, this, if done one thing today, it's that you realize again that this stuff is more complicated, and working with a professional is ultimately in your best interest. And we'll get into some of the specifics of these issues, really based on what we see every day in the office when clients kind of come to us and say, I did a thing before I came to see you. And we explain to them, why, generally some of the do-it-yourself stuff can really lead to some unintended consequences. So why don't we move to the next slide? The financial power of attorney, I sort of have it here as its own slide because a lot of people who call us say, oh, I need a will. I don't have a will, or I have a really old will. And so can you do a new will for me? And we absolutely can. But for most of us, the more critical document is the financial power of attorney, also called a general durable power of attorney. And this is a document that appoints someone called an agent, or sometimes referred to as an attorney in fact, to manage your finances while you're living. They can be effective immediately, or they can be what's called springing, that they're only effective when you become incapacitated. Uh, so I'm going to pause here because I have very strong preferences on this one. Some clients say, well, I'd rather do the springing one because I'm worried about people taking control too soon, right? I don't want to give up control. I'm worried. Um, and that's a valid concern. Um, but when you make the document springing, the trigger usually is in a doctor's opinion that you are unable to handle your affairs. So while that all sounds great, in reality, when we see this play out, it's usually somebody calling me hysterical from the bank because they couldn't get the doctor's note because the doctor didn't want to get involved, right? And they can't get access to the bank accounts because the banker says it says you need the doctor's note in order for you to be the agent. So sorry, we can't help you. There are ways to make it effective immediately while still retaining some control. You know, one by not giving the document to your agent and just letting them know where it is when the time comes, and then they can go get it. There's an agent acknowledgement that they need to sign at that time, which can be signed even many years after you've made the original document. And in that way, when the time comes to act, they're ready to go. They don't need any doctor's permission to prove to a financial institution that they can help you manage your affairs. Now, you might think, well, what's the urgency? Why would someone need to act quickly? Well, if you think about the cost of nursing home care, right, in Pennsylvania in particular, it's around $400 a day. And that's a pretty large number. So when we're working with families and they haven't don't have a great power of attorney or don't have a power of attorney at all, it really limits our ability to put together a plan that can rearrange the assets to cut off that $400 a day. So there's a real economic cost to building in a barrier inside of your power of attorney. So I generally do not recommend springing and say that you should figure out other ways to retain control and also try to figure out, what is, with my client, what is the hesitation? Because a lot of times in talking with clients, I find that the fear is sort of nebulous, and that when we talk through it, hey, you're naming your daughter who lives with you, who takes care of everything already. I doubt she's going to try to suddenly become evil and take advantage of you. So, things like that. Every conversation I have with every family is different. And for me, you're worth the conversation. It's not just about getting the paperwork, my least favorite word. It's about getting a plan together. And the financial power of attorney really is the cornerstone of a great elder law plan. So who do you pick? Well, you pick the person who's going to do a good job. Sometimes clients will say, well, shouldn't I pick my oldest child? He's going to be really upset if I don't pick him. And again, this is another conversation to have with my client. There's really no reason to pick somebody who isn't a good fit for the job, even if their birth order is, number one in the lineup. Sometimes parents will choose two children, but that's not necessarily a no-no, but generally it is, if it's possible and makes sense, it's better to pick one and then have them sort of one after the other because it's just easier for one person to deal with the financial institutions and things like this. Some of the financial institutions flat out refuse to honor a power of attorney that has two people in it. So there's just some things to think through, before we start picking two people, and that you're really making sure that you're selecting the person who's going to do the best job. So how do you know? Well, just think about the skills that you would need to handle finances, right? You need to be organized, right? You need to keep good records. In this day and age, you need to be good on the computer, right? You need to have an email address, a cell phone. You need to really be able to undertake all of the duties in an efficient way. So you might have a child who's really great at the sort of office part of things, but might not be so great at the emotional decisions that come with a healthcare power of attorney that we'll look at in a second. But it doesn't have to be the same people whenever we're selecting agents or even an executor. It has to be the right person for the job. And that's how we're going to make sure things get done correctly. Why don't we move on to the next slide? Okay, so like I was saying, we have a healthcare power of attorney and a living will. The healthcare power of attorney is who's going to make medical decisions for you if you're unable to do so based on your healthcare preferences. So this is really critical. The most important thing that you can do when it comes to your healthcare is select your agent who is going to make the same decision that you would make if you were able. Because when they are called upon to act, they can't ask you your opinion, right? If you're able to give your opinion, if you're able to give informed consent, then we never need to use the healthcare power of attorney. But it's a really critical thing to inform the person who's going to be your agent about your wishes, your preferences, who your doctors are, your medical conditions, what medications you're on, hospitals or rehabs you don't want to go to or do want to go to. You know, a really great resource that I've been talking about for a long time now is the Conversation Project, um, because it's gives us all the tools to have these tough conversations. Most of us don't want to talk about this stuff, right? It's uncomfortable, it's personal. Maybe you've never had to share this kind of thing with your kids. The Conversation Project, which is a website, conversationproject.org, has lots of great resources for you if you're trying to think about how am I going to have this conversation with my family that I know I need to have about my healthcare decisions, and in particular, the parts of the document that comprise the living will, where you're making decisions about end of life. So when you're in a condition of permanent unconsciousness that you're not going to wake up from, or that you're terminally ill and are reasonably expected to pass away soon but can't participate in your own health care. So it's really, really critical that you do the documents plus have the conversation. Um, and then what do you do with the documents once you've gotten them signed? Well, you're going to give a copy to your doctors, copy to your agent who's acting for you. If you participate in a health system like Mainline Health or Crozier or Penn, they all have patient portals, your individualized patient portal, and you can actually upload your healthcare documents there so that they're available to whoever's treating you inside of that health system. Now, you note I said copy, and it's important to note that your copies of your healthcare power of attorney and living will and your financial power of attorney are just as good as the original. So you can use those. You don't need to give your original documents to anyone. You should always keep your original documents in a safe place, but the copies that you provide are just as good as the originals and can be honored. Why don't we move on to the next slide? Did we have any questions, Allie, popping up as I'm going along? Does not appear, does not appear so. So I'll keep going. So I've kind of touched on this. Not one size fits all when it comes to estate planning. And then the first, a bullet point is something that clients sometimes are surprised that they have to tell me what they have in terms of their assets, right? And it's so important, when we have clients who are reticent to share that information, we say it's kind of like going to the doctor and refusing to let them, lift up your shirt and take your, to see what's going on with you medically, or we all have to share information, in order to get the best diagnosis. So the idea is if we have a great, accurate asset list, then that you're going to get better advice. And one of the areas that people tend to make a mistake is that they don't recognize that there should be a coordination to a certain degree of beneficiary designations, joint accounts, and what it says in your will. So I'll give a quick example. So I'll have a client come in and we'll do a will that says, I'm leaving everything in equal shares to my 3 kids. Pretty simple, makes sense. So we put that into place. The client comes in and she signs the document. She does a financial power of attorney naming 1 kid as the agent. Sounds good so far, right? Well, following the appointment, the client and her daughter, the agent, go into a bank, and the nice person at the bank says, oh, you know what you should do? Add your daughter on all of your accounts as a joint owner That will make it easier when the time comes, basically ignoring the power of attorney. So my client agrees. They don't call me first, and they agree, and then they set everything up with one daughter as the joint account owner. Fast forward, mom passes away, her will doesn't mean anything because everything, all of the assets are going to pass to that one daughter by operation of law on all of those accounts that were made joint. There was no connection between what they did, what she did in the will, and what happened at the bank that day. Now, as you probably gathered, most of my clients hear this from me before. So it's not a real world example, hopefully, because I tend to beat the drum on this a little bit during the course of the representation. But I do see it a lot for people who haven't joined us as planning clients, but as a state client. So someone's passed away, and we have a will that was supposed that everybody understood in the family was supposed to do one thing, give everything to the three kids equally, and assets that are titled either jointly or have a beneficiary designation on them that just go to the one kid. Now, in most families, maybe that's not a problem, right? The one kid will agree to share. And that could be the case. And I've seen that plenty of times in the time I've been practicing, but not always, right? Family dynamics are not to be discounted. That's why I spend a lot of time asking my clients about their families and how people get along. Because once you've passed away, you're not there to mediate the disputes between your kids. And if one kid decides that they're finally going to, bring all those grudges to bear and they're going to just keep the money, it can be really challenging, right? Because the joint accounts just pass to them by operation of law, beneficiary designated assets just go to them. It can be really hard to challenge that after the fact. So having not just paperwork, but having a plan put together that's focused on a complete and accurate asset list, while seems, again, in the beginning, before you've gotten to know us, intrusive, it can have real consequences for how your wealth passes when you pass away. So again, we're always looking at, do we have blended families? Um, do distributions need to be equal, or does it make sense to make things unequal? Are there ways to plan for what if you gave a lot of gifts to one kid who had financial need during your lifetime, but at the end you want to kind of have a true up so that it's equalized at the end? That doesn't happen in the absence of careful drafting. So just some things to think about there in terms of, again, having your estate planning be tailored to your particular situation. All right, we move to the next slide. Okay. I kind of touched on this. We plan because we want to avoid conflicts. Everybody says to me, I want things to go smooth when the time comes. And that doesn't happen for the most part in the absence of planning. And you also want to set clear expectations, right? Make sure your kids all understand. You don't have to tell them everything. I don't advocate for that. You're entitled to confidentiality. And I certainly can't tell them anything. If you change your will, I am not at liberty to tell your kids that you've done so, due to confidentiality, nor do I have an obligation to. So it's really up to you to set clear expectations with the kids in terms of, what their inheritance is going to be. You might say, don't expect to get anything because I'm going to live well, and I hope that you do, and spend my last dollar on my last day at a tiki bar in Maui or whatever your thing is. So, again, talking to your kids is really important. So why don't we move on to care planning, which is the most important aspect, really. So many times we see families that are stuck, right? You don't know what to do. Everything seems confusing, expensive. You don't know which way to go, and so you do nothing. Makes sense, right? Inertia is a very powerful force. I'd like to think that even if we're just meeting with clients for like a 1 hour consultation, that we can help you get a little unstuck. We get that transitions can be overwhelming and scary. Uh, but hopefully we can help you navigate that to find what we call an appropriate plan of care for you. Okay, so not what other people want, what do you want? Again, to beat the drum for this, the importance of planning early means you get to be a part of the conversation. So we're looking at the least restrictive setting possible where somebody can be safe. Note I didn't say happy. Most older adults don't want to move, right? Um, but we know that if we don't make a change, they're not going to be safe, right? So it's a really tricky balance, right? Of deciding to advocate for someone to move to a new setting, even though they might not want to or might even put up some resistance, because we know it's where it's safe. I will say, when I talk to families initially, and if we're working with clients, we work with them for a year. Usually, my initial conversation, I'm told something like, "My mom will never go for that." And when we develop our relationship with the client, when we develop our care planning with our elder care coordinators that are assigned to each file, it's always so great to reflect back at the end of the year, to say to my clients, "Do you remember that first meeting when you said mom would never go for that? And now here we are a year later. She's settled. She's in a new setting. Maybe she's in a personal care home. She loves her new apartment. She's making friends. She's going to meals. She's participating in activities, all the things that you said she'll never do. And now look at how stress-free you appear, when we do the meeting. It's always such a rewarding feeling for me and the team to help people navigate from this place of it'll never happen to we did it with your help and it went great. So, home is great, but it isn't always best, right? Most of our homes, not all, some again, and home might be right for you. Our care coordinators help us assess whether it is. Um, most homes aren't set up for people to become, critically ill or to develop dementia to the point where they really have no idea what's going on and can't be saved. It requires a lot of supervision and monitoring. And most families these days, we talk about the sandwich generation, people in my age bracket in their, 40s and 50s who are raising kids, and taking care of aging parents. There's only so much, sort of bandwidth, as they say, to take this on. And we can't, just with that limited amount of attention we're able to give, keep the older adults safe. So trying to explore, helping support, explore the other options, and then the financing, which we'll get to in a second, is really critical. Because again, we don't want people to get stuck. When people get stuck, well, what happens there? Well, generally, it leads to some catastrophe, right? Someone stays at home longer than everyone knows is safe. An example, then mom breaks a hip, falls at home, breaks a hip, maybe she's not found right away. And then it sort of landslides from there, right? That's never what any of us want to have, happen. So really getting into and meeting our families where they're at, oftentimes in this stuck place, and helping them get unstuck can really prevent a lot of unnecessary injuries to an older adult who wants to stay home despite it not being safe to do so. So we'll look at the next slide, which kind of addresses what does the continuum of care look like? I've used that term a lot today. So this is, I love this infographic. It really sort of helps understand the progression of aging. So if we start at the far left, right, we have somebody who's healthy and has the ability to function independently. There are no limits. They're not paying for any care. They may be paying for lots of other things to live at home. But that's where we all start. Now, the one misleading thing about this is that life isn't so simple, right? That sometimes somebody will zoom all the way over to needing more care because there's been a fall or something like this, right? They don't get to progress orderly through the steps. And they might then be able to come home, or maybe not go home, but go to assisted living, or maybe they have to stay in a nursing home, right? Because whatever happened at home has made it so that it's no longer a safe option. So the continuum is, you can kind of zigzag along and, it doesn't necessarily just go in one direction. So when we're doing planning and again having elder care coordinators on our team, it helps us make the best decision, with the information, that we're given from the clinical team that's taking care of you, looking at, the possible progression if you have an illness like Alzheimer's, where is that going to lead? What should we be planning for, not just for today, but for the future? And then there's the all important idea of cost, right? So we know that home with assistance, there's a dollar sign there, like a single dollar sign. And then as you see, as we go across, there's two, then three, then four. Also a little misleading, but also it kind of lines up with the limited function. Home care, particularly after we've had some significant deficits can get really, really expensive. The average cost of care, for home care is, anywhere between $32 and $37 an hour. So that can really start to add up for folks. And, as you can do the math there, keeping somebody 24/7 with home care can be really expensive, more so than even a nursing home. So, when we're working with clients, we want to figure out, are there safety nets, public benefit safety nets that we can trigger to try to pay for some of this care? So you'll see that on the far end of the very bottom row is Medicaid, and that typically will pay for care in a nursing home. Um, but it also, if people are low income and low countable assets, could pay for some care at home. So there is an income cap for Medicaid at home. It's currently $2,901 for the Medicaid income cap. So, part of our work is always to figure out, are you eligible? And that's gross income. So sometimes clients will just go by what's in the bank account that hits the statement every month, but it's really the gross income every month that allows you to try to get Medicaid. And you can have no more than 8,000 in resources. And that's for Medicaid in the community. When you get Medicaid in the nursing home, your income is part of your cost of care. It's a cost sharing program. So when you apply for Medicaid, we get your resources all the way down, your countable resources down to $2,400, and your income, save for a whopping $60 a month for your personal needs, all must be paid over to the nursing home, with very important exceptions if you have a low income spouse in the community. So let's move to the next slide. I think we've covered some of these already, just the options for care. Assisted living, personal care, memory care. I just want to take a second on this. So true assisted living is where you have some need for care, right? And that they agree to take care of you with your assets sort of for the rest of your days. There are very few true standalone assisted livings in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and very few in our area. Most of the assisted livings we see exist within continuing care retirement communities so that you transition from your independent living apartment to their assisted living. And then when you can't really function there, they don't have the staffing for you, then you move over to the nursing home part of the community. But to find a true standalone assisted living, they're very few and far between. The most of the residents that you see as you're driving around are personal care or memory care. And that's important because in a personal care home, the way they're regulated is once your level of care becomes too much for them to care for, you need to move along to a nursing home. And the other downside is if you run out of money, right, there's no Medicaid in personal care or assisted living or memory care. And that always comes as a real disappointment to people, right? So there's no Medicaid in our area. And there's little tiny instances of it that they're trying out, but nothing in Pennsylvania. And they do offer it in New Jersey and Delaware, Medicaid and personal care, memory care, but there's a limited number of slots. So it's going to be all private dollars. And the costs usually run anywhere, I've seen it all over the place, 3,000 to 10,000, depends on the community, depends on the level of care that you need, right? So when you go to apply to a personal care home or a memory care, they're going to have somebody come out and do an assessment of you, and then they'll figure out based on how you assess how much the care costs are going to be to take care of you above the base room and board. Again, sometimes that comes as a shock to people because they'll get a quote from the lovely sales and marketing people, and they are lovely. And that's just the base fee. There can be additional fees depending on the amount of care you need. Skilled nursing facility, just the last one, which is the Medicaid, where you can get Medicaid. And I want to bust this myth in every talk I give, and it's that not every nursing home that takes Medicaid is a bad facility. I hear that a lot. Oh, I don't want my mother to go to one of those Medicaid places. Well, guess what? Most nursing homes accept Medicaid, and there's really great care provided regardless of whether, they take Medicaid or not. And there's some facilities that don't take Medicaid, and the care isn't that great. So it really isn't the way to think about it, right? So when you're looking, for options, and you should try to find, if you're really, thinking about this, one that does accept Medicaid, if at all possible, or try to look to plan early and become a resident of a continuing care community. If that's for you, it might not be. Congregate living isn't for everyone, as somebody once told me in an elevator of a CCRC while I was on my way to give a presentation. But again, there's all these options, and part of life care planning is helping you figure out what's one that makes the most sense. Sorry, Allie, now we can head over to the next slide. So again, why hire a law firm to coordinate the care? Hopefully by all this, discussion we've had thus far is that you can see that there's a lot to it, right? It's really confusing, and it's hard to know what's right for you unless you're talking to somebody who can help guide you to the right decision. And it's coordinating the legal, the care, the estate planning. And we like to say, or we hope that we do, take on the burden of worry for you. So when we meet with clients, usually, like I said, no one ever calls because they're having an awesome day, something's wrong. Most of them are comforted to know that we become right, and we're going to support you as you go through your aging journey and help you suss out what your plan of care is going to be, and then align the estate planning and asset planning. And our elder care coordinators are absolutely the rock stars of our team, that help us support our clients. So just really quickly to touch on what's an elder care coordinator, it's on the next slide. So Allie, can we go to the next slide? There we go. So our elder care coordinators, again, we have two, they're going to do an assessment. They'll provide education and advocacy, but the assessment is the most critical piece. It helps us determine the appropriate level of care for you, right? And sometimes we don't know, we might do an initial meeting with the family, and then we go out to see our client, and, we come up with a different conclusion about what the options are. We participate in, initial care planning conferences if somebody's in a facility. We, help you identify and facilitate proper care, identify any additional resources. You need home care agencies, you need a clean out service, transportation. We really try to serve as the point of contact and assisting with the coordination of all kinds of services. So let's move on to financing, and with the last little bit that we have left. Everyone wants to know, that all sounds great. How the hell do I pay for it? It's a great question. Everyone has income. We know seniors are on a fixed income. Typically, they have their Social Security, pensions. Maybe they have an RMD they're getting from a retirement account. They have investments, home. And then we want to look at types of coverages. Long-term care insurance is a great thing. It's hard to get, once you've reached, past a certain age, because they have underwriting. There's not a lot of options out there. It's a shrinking market and it's expensive, but if you have it, it's a really great thing. Most people are surprised to know that Medicare does not cover custodial long-term care. So if you go into a hospital and you have 3 days in the hospital, then when you transition to rehab, Medicare will cover that. But beyond that, when you've maxed out of your Medicare covered skilled time, but you're not able to go home, that's all private dollars. And it's not picked up by Medicare, but instead Medicaid, provided that you meet the asset requirements. So a common thing I hear is, well, then the Medicaid will kick in. Medicaid does not kick in. Medicaid is a benefit that's applied for. So you need to take action to get Medicaid to pay for your skilled nursing facility or your home and community-based services, like we talked about a few minutes ago. And it's not an easy benefit to apply for, and it's currently under attack. We certainly are very worried about it in our office. But when you apply for Medicaid, there's a lot of documentation that you need to provide. A lot of folks are familiar with this idea of 5 years, but not really sure what that relates to. So I'll explain that now. So when you go to apply for Medicaid, again, it doesn't kick in. You have to make an action to apply for it. They're going to ask for 5 years worth of bank statements, investment account statements, retirement account, you name it, they ask for it. They're going to ask going back 5 years because what they're looking for is to see, did you make any gifts to family within that 5 year period that would cause you to lose eligibility for the Medicaid program. Now, the loss of eligibility relates to the size of the gift and a thing called the penalty divisor. And it's a really complex calculation, but what you want to do when you're doing your planning, and when we do planning for clients, we take in the 5 years of statements and comb through them. As one of my team members said today, we have a new team member, and she said, "This is really tedious." It is, but super necessary because we're trying to find out if there's anything that would cause our application to be denied. Right. So we're always looking through to make sure that on that 5 years of statements that there's no gifts, or if there are gifts, we're able to supply a good explanation for them. But it's not true that, oh, if I've made a gift within 5 years, I'm stuck, I'm out of luck. That's absolutely not true. And another myth is, well, I can give up to $19,000 a year. My accountant said so. And that is a big myth, and it relates to federal gift tax rules, which have nothing to do with the Medicaid rules. It is true that anyone can give an annual exclusion gift under the federal gift tax rules to anyone, and it doesn't count towards your lifetime exclusion, which is now currently $14 million, set to go down to around 6 or 7. But it has nothing to do with Medicaid. Medicaid is looking for any gifts over $500. So it's not that your accountant is lying to you. They're just not thinking about the Medicaid rules. And why would they? That's not their area of expertise, right? They're focused on the gift tax rules. But it's really super important to understand that really the number is actually over $500 and within the 5 years immediately preceding when you need to apply for Medicaid. So we've kind of covered this on the next slide, the different sources of payment of different levels of care. So again, adult daycare, sometimes you can get Medicare. You get PT and OT coming to the house after you've been discharged from a hospital, but it's very limited and it ends. We talked about the magic number for Medicaid home and community-based services, also known as waiver. There's a limited number of slots. Long-term care insurance, as we mentioned, is a great thing to have. It really can help to keep people out of the nursing home, right? Because it gives you a funding source for that middle level of the continuum of care, that personal care, memory care. Again, personal care is only private pay, and nursing home is covered by Medicare if you're there for limited time and limited by what you have going on medically. Some people, another myth, there's so many myths in this area. Another myth people hear is, well, I get 100 days of Medicare, and you get up to 100 days, right? So at any point when you're in your stay in a rehabilitation facility following a spell of illness, where you were in a hospital for 3 days, and you weren't on observation status, um, then Medicare will pay up to 100 days. It is not a guaranteed 100 days. If at any point they decide, hey, you're not, sometimes they'll use this term, and this isn't the law. They'll say you've plateaued. Um, that, so we're going to decrease your skill time, and they'll hand you your notice of non-coverage. We always recommend clients, you take that to a lawyer, or you try to appeal that to get extra time. But ultimately, everyone's Medicare days do run out for your spell of illness. For Medicaid, there's always something that you can do. One of the things that I hear, again, another myth, is I need to spend all of my money at the nursing home. They told me once I give them all of my money, then they'll help me apply for the Medicaid application. True, they probably will. But most people that come to see me think, isn't there another way? Are there any things that I can do to protect my spouse, to protect maybe a disabled child that I have, to provide for my family? And the answer is, yeah, there's usually things that we can do. You don't just need to, sign over all of your hard-earned money to the nursing home because they've agreed that, when you've given them every last nickel, they'll help you with the Medicaid application. It's never too late to plan. And, worst case scenario, you have a meeting with us and we give you options about what you can do. And the worst case scenario really is when I have to talk to you about what you should have done, right? Because you didn't get advice in time and you've already given all your money. Lastly, hospice is a really key benefit under the Medicare program. It really can provide additional services to adults who have been certified by a physician, who have, 6 months, no more than 6 months to live. But here's the thing, some people hear hospice and get worried that it means that someone's going to die soon. And that's just not the case. No one really knows. It's a doctor's best guess. And I have clients who have graduated many times, from hospice and then go back on again. So it's a really great benefit. So if it is offered, you want to ask questions about, what will additional free services that will get you. And most of the time it's beneficial to take the hospice benefit if it's being offered in addition to everything else you're getting. Um, the last bit I want to cover is really as the house. So a house is a really tricky planning tool. And if I leave you with one thing, and hopefully I've given you a few little golden nuggets today, is don't give your house to your kids. There is an emotional attachment to a house, and I understand the motivating factor why people do that. Maybe a house has been in the family for generations, things like this, but it has a lot of unintended consequences. So, obviously loss of control is a big one, right? We see this a lot in other, not some, we see this a lot in, other communities, maybe not so much, Delaware County, but where you put your kid on your deed or you give your kid the house and then they kick you out, right? And there's nothing you can do. You gave it away. And that's a really tough position to be in. Or if you give your house to your kid for $1 because, they said they'd always take care of you, then they get a mortgage default and now the house is lost to foreclosure. That gift of the house can also impede you qualifying for public benefits in most instances. Long story short, gifting a house is a very, very, very challenging thing to explain or unwind if we need to do it. It generally does need to be unwound to qualify you for Medicaid. So the best course of action is don't do it without getting qualified legal counsel to advise you. There's also tax consequences that you need to be mindful of. If you bought your house and, for $20,000, 50 years ago, and now it's worth $500,000, when you give your house to your kid, they take your cost basis in the property of $20,000. Whereas if you kept it in your name and then passed away, they would get a step up in basis, right? And all of that gain, embedded capital gain, the difference between the 20,000 and the 500,000 in my example, all goes away. Now, these are things to talk through with a tax advisor and attorney, but don't just sign your house away for $1. Now, I know it's easy to do. That's why people do it. Well, I can just get on Staples and get the form and scribble on it, get it, take it to a notary and be done. True, you can. But the unintended consequences, are not going to be evident to you until after. Like, for example, when you try to apply for your mom to have Medicaid and they say no because she made a gift of the house to you. So, next slide. I think you'll have all these things. Again, when you're gifting house for $1, beware of the Medicaid rules, but there are certain important excluded transfers. And can you transfer your house to a trust? Again, you can, right? Not all that difficult to do. The difficult thing is to understand whether you should or not. So in the materials, we have some information about asset protection planning with irrevocable trusts and the types of trust that you need to be aware of, whether it's a revocable trust, which means you still have all the control of the assets, or an irrevocable trust, which means you've essentially made a gift to the trust and it's no longer in your control anymore. So all of these things, hopefully I've shared with you, you understand a little bit that, navigating the continuum of care is challenging. And if we're not looking at all the different options, if we're just saying, hey, I want to trust, we're missing out on all of the things that can help us age successfully, and where we want to age with the decision makers in place that we want to have be making decisions for us at our most vulnerable time. I think we have, what options are there people without family is a question. That's a great question I get all the time. There are some nonprofits or other businesses banks that will serve as an agent or an executor, trustee, that do serve that role. We have a list of those. You can call the office for recommendations. Defining safe. Safe means that you're able to be left alone, and that you're not going to wander outside. You're able to provide for everything to keep you healthy, safe, you're not taking your medications at the wrong time. You're not overdosing on medications. It is absolutely a great question. There's a lot to it. And that's why we have elder care coordination, because it can be very personal, right? What's safe for you, may not be for somebody else, but generally it's to make sure that no risk of harm, physical harm or mental harm comes to our client. We do not do ad hoc elder care coordination. That's another question I just got. We do it as part of a life care planning engagement. That said, there are companies that just offer geriatric care management. They're private firms. And again, if you call the office, we can give you a recommendation for a private geriatric care manager who can provide those services to you at an hourly rate. With that, those are all great questions. With that, I think we are at time, but I want to thank you. I kind of went a little quickly because we had a lot to cover today, but I really want to thank everyone for their attention today.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, everyone who joined today. We hope you found the session helpful. We also want to invite you to our next webinar on April 24th, and we'll be covering the important topic of the cost of long-term care. So keep an eye out in your email, and we'll be sending a flyer and an invitation. And then if you'd like to learn more about how we can support you and your family, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can call our office directly or visit our website and you can schedule an appointment. And if anybody would like this PowerPoint, you can email info@andersonelderlaw.com and I'll be happy to send it to you because I know we had some requests for that. So thank you again, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.